everyone, Oli here, and this is my review of Time and the Rani, the first story of the 24th season of classic Doctor Who, starring Sylvester McCoy as the 7th Doctor. Time and the Rani is the 140th story overall. It's 4 parts long and is written by Pip and Jane Baker. So after the madness and chaos that went behind the making of Trial of a Time Lord, which is now firmly in the rearview mirror, and as a result we unfortunately lost Colin Baker as a result of the BBC unceremoniously firing him, we now move forth in the new era of Doctor Who, which unfortunately would be its last. It's a shame that things were starting to look up for the last 2 seasons, but in this new era, John Nathan Turner is still the producer, but he has a new script editor in Andrew Cartmel, who was definitely key in making this era stand out in comparison to the other seasons and eras in the 1980s, and he went about in trying to include more mystery into the Doctor, something that Chris Chibnall tried to do and didn't do too well, but the less said about the better for now. So he wanted to have the Doctor, so he wanted to try and include more mystery into the Doctor by having his identity questioned for the first time ever, but I'll get into that more later into the era. So the plot of Time and the Rani is as follows. Violently rushed out of time, the TARDIS is brought crashing down onto the planet Lacursha by the villainous Rani. Caught within the maelstrom, the Doctor is forced to regenerate. Imprisoning the Doctor in her stronghold, the Rani seizes upon his vulnerable state. By impersonating his friend Mel, the Rani deceives the unwitting Doctor into helping her achieve her audacious plan. Just what is she up to? Why is she enslaved Albert Einstein and a host of geniuses? And as an asteroid composed of strange matter approaches Lacursha, can a weakened Doctor save the universe when he has little idea of who he really is? So that is the plot of Time and the Rani. Time and the Rani is a story that's widely disliked by many Whovians, including myself, and this story is just really, really bad. The same way the Twin Dynamo pretty much doomed the Colin Baker era, even though I do enjoy that story, but I do think that the Time and the Rani, aside from the other BBC fuckery that was going on with them pretty much not necessarily brown nosing, just looking down on Doctor Who, but it's just, I do think this story kind of set Sylvester McCoy up for failure. Even though it did turn around in season 25, thanks to Andrew Cartmel's vision for Doctor Who really starting to come through, and season 26 pretty much building upon that, but I honestly do think that this story kind of did set McCoy up for failure in a way. So the production was quite iffy, so to speak, even though I did like the special effects, which have been made with computers and CGI since the last season, and I did like how the scene where the TARDIS was under attack in the cold open, and then the computer effects actually did look really good, even though it was dated and it was made in 1987, but it was quite decent. And for the first time since 1980, we get a completely new title sequence and a new rearrangement of the theme tune, and the new tune is composed by Kev McCullough. The opening was made of computers, and it's a bit tough to explain, so it starts off with like a big bang, and there's it's like stars or something just coming together to like form like a vortex or something. Then you have some like asteroids just like flying into the vortex, and then suddenly the TARDIS is inside the bubble, and that pretty much like merges into the vortex itself, and then we see Sylvester McCoy's face briefly on screen, winks, and then there's another big bang, and then you see and the letters spelling out who WHO pretty much are tumbling down, and then it turns around, and then suddenly Doctor Who, the title, is pretty much visible, and then we have the story and the writer of the story showing underneath, and then as soon as the episode starts, and we have part 1, and then we have what part the story is in, kind of like what happened in. So this is the first time this has actually happened since the 60s, in which the part number has actually appeared within the story itself. But it is actually one of my favorite openings of the classic Who, if not one of my favorite openings of all time, because of how different it is. The sets were alright. I like the Rani's laboratory and the little room where her big brain was located. It looked rather creepy, as it was actually pulsating quite a few times. You can see the stems around the brain. It was quite creepy. I like the location filming. It's set in the usual BBC quarry, but this one I actually rather than liked. It felt very planet-like, but I do think that the script really ruined the story, and the dialogue was just really, really bad, and the direction by Andrew Morgan could have been better, but it was just not that good in my opinion. And I think the plot wasn't really suitable for a Doctor Who story, and this is something you probably see in a cartoon or something, like the Rani's motives in trying to create some sort of big brain to try and destroy Lakershire was just, you'd see something in the cartoon, or at least it was something you see in like a bad pantomime or whatever. And speaking of which, I think that the acting was just very pantomimish, and it was just, it looked very silly, and it was just, I didn't like it at all. It was just, it did not sit right with me at all. And an example of how terrible the panto acting was, and this is in part two, where the Doctor, with Rani revealed herself because she was in the male. She was dressed up as Mel for to try and confuse the Doctor, but that's, we'll get into that later. I didn't really like that plot. She unveils herself, but the Doctor figured out before that Rani was actually Mel for a considerable amount of time when he met the real Mel. So she took off the wig, and then the Doctor grabbed his scarf and then pretty much tied her up with it and ran away, and that was just, no. Even though Sylvester McCoy is very skilled in comedy, and did you amend him for that? It does help with some of the comedic timings and in other humorous scenes later on in his era, but here it just abused the fuck out of comedy, and it was very odd and just very weird. And the time of the run, it was actually meant to be in a very different story in comparison to what was actually aired, because this was actually written as a Sixth Doctor story, seeing as Colin Baker was actually fired the previous year, but the producers were actually wanted him to come back for this story, so he can actually form a regeneration scene. This would have been his final story, so to speak, but Colin Baker turned it down because he wanted more than just one story. He actually wanted an entire season, which I don't blame him for, because the BBC pretty much scapegoated him into why the Doctor Who did not work in that sort of in the mid 80s, so to speak. So I don't, as I said before, I don't blame him for not doing it again. But Colin Baker actually did say he regretted not coming back because it pretty much robbed fans of a proper regeneration story. But he does actually do a proper regeneration story in Big Finish, as I said before. And so, as a result of that, the Sixth Doctor actually does regenerate at the start of this story, and the way he regenerates is just so fucking stupid, because he's on the exercise bike, and then while the TARDIS is under attack by the Rani, he pretty much falls over and then hits his head again. And we don't actually see it, but it's implied that it does happen to him. He falls down and just hits his head against the TARDIS console, and it was just really, really, really stupid. But then obviously I said before, Big Finish actually fixes this, and the Doctor actually died of radiation once again. But I'd rather take radiation than just a simple bump on the head against the TARDIS console. And the scene, and had Colin Baker actually returned for the story, what would have caused his regeneration is what actually killed Bayes at the end of Time of the Rani. There were some alright moments, some forgettable and some unforgettable moments for the right and wrong reasons. The Sixth Doctor's regeneration being, of course, very bad, and as I said, for the reason why this was bad, because Sylvester McCoy pretty much had to put on a blonde wig and be the Sixth Doctor, so essentially it was Sylvester McCoy regenerating into himself. This was just basically Sylvester McCoy regenerating in a wig, and his new form was basically his normal self, sans the wig. So there were some very bad camp performances, which were just really annoying. But there were some good scenes, and I think one scene I actually did like was when Mel actually first met the Seventh Doctor. Minus the theatrics, when Doctor gave Mel was giving her an aeroplane spin, and so to speak, and then he realized. So they pretty much had to prove to each other that the Doctor had to prove to Mel that she was the Doctor, that he is the Doctor, and Mel had to prove to the Doctor she's not the Rani by feeling their pulses. So Mel felt the Doctor's two pulses, because I think the Time Lords have double pulses on each wrist to represent their two hearts. So the Mel realizes that he is the Doctor, and the Doctor realizes that she was Mel, and that was a very nice scene. It was a very nice scene, and I think that was a nice establishment for the Seventh Doctor, and As silly as the story was, I think the part 3 cliffhanger was actually quite good. Like, the part 3 cliffhanger got really intense, and this is when the doctor was like pretty much put into the Rani's brain machine, and then he was like he was like lying and he was just violently vibrating like this, whilst Mel was being restrained, and she had no choice but to just watch it happen. So yeah, so good moments, some bad, some good. So yeah, but mostly bad. But yeah. So on to the acting, which was bad. It was like terrible, probably one of the worst acting I've ever seen in Doctor Who ever. But from the main cast, it was actually good, but they were just really ruined by how terrible the script was. Sylvester McCoy I actually thought was quite good, and I do feel bad that this had to be his first story. If you compare Time and Rani to something like The Curse of Fenric or something, and then the difference, I don't, even though I don't want to do this, but then the difference between the two is very jarring, so to speak. And you think, when you've been thinking, how can an amazing doctor like McCoy be getting a story like this? But then again, John per- but then again, Tom Baker had something like Genesis of the Daleks, but then we had Underworld and in the same season. So yeah. So but even though Sylvester McCoy is a comedic actor, which does fit in with what Jonathan Turner wanted the Seventh Doctor to be, a very silly, bumbling fool like the Second Doctor, and McCoy did actually handle that aspect very well, thanks to his experience in comedy, and he does handle some of the pretty dramatic stuff very well, and which we'll see later on in his era. But yeah, even he does actually change, and it does feel out of place and very silly, but for this story. But then, as I said before, the next two seasons actually expose the Doctor in depth, giving us a more serious, darker, manipulative, Machiavellian Doctor than we've ever seen. And so thanks to McCoy's comedic skills and comedic timing, he is able to salvage some of the bad script. Yep, and I especially like the scene when he was in the TARDIS trying to pick out his new outfit, and he does with references of outfits from previous Doctors, such as the Third Doctor's velvet cat jacket, the Second Doctor's fur coat, the Fifth Doctor's cricket outfit, and the Fourth Doctor's red coat from season 18. And he finally finds his outfit, the famous cream jacket with the question mark sweater vest and the brown plaid trousers and his hat, even though he does actually change the jacket to a darker jacket in season 26, which I actually do prefer to this one, but both are still good. And he does actually have mentioned a joke saying how he pretty much regained some of his impeccable sense of haute couture. And the Seventh Doctor also tends to carry on with an umbrella, which he somehow likes but is never explained. But then again, the Fifth Doctor wore a label of celery, which was pretty much unexplained for most of his era, and the Sixth Doctor wore a cat badge. But then the umbrella that we see here is pretty much different to the umbrellas that we see in other stories. Like in here, he carries the Sixth Doctor's colorful umbrella. The next story, Paradise Towers, he has an umbrella with a bamboo handle, and then the following story, Delta and the Bannerman sees the debut of the question mark umbrella, which he actually carries with the rest of him, carries for the rest of his era. One aspect I do like about the Seventh Doctor is how often he fumbles his proverbs by using the wrong words all the time. Even though this actually disappears in season 25, I think he was meant to have come back in one story, but then Jonathan didn't want to come back. But he often fumbles his proverbs from time to time. And an example is at the end when he says, "Time and tide melts the snowman," and the actual saying is, "Time waits for no man," which Mel does actually correct him. It was quite funny, and I think this is obviously a Jonathan Turner idea, even though he didn't actually want it to return in other stories. But having it in this story makes sense because he just regenerated. Bonnie Langford, and I honestly think that she doesn't deserve to have Mel written this way. It was quite terrible. Even though I do think Langford did good with what she was given, but I don't like how Mel wrote it in the story. She does do some heavy lifting, and but it was just didn't do her male justice at all. She wakes up in the TARDIS after landing in Lacotia to find the Doctor missing, but she was actually woken by Econa, who another Lacosian, these greenish-looking aliens, and then she witnesses another Lacosian called San getting killed by one of the Rani's booby trap, and Icona assumes she's evil and decides to hold her hostage because she doesn't look like like them, so to speak. But she later escapes, and then she ends up in the Rani's booby trap, and then Icona pretty much has to free her, and then he realizes that Mel isn't actually evil, but then they do brawl for a bit. So no, actually, she goes into the lab to try and find the doctor. She finds the doctor. They brawl for a bit, but she doesn't realize that was the doctor until she realizes that she was the doctor, and he realizes that she's Mel because the Rani was just up as Mel, and the doctor was pretty much confused after that. So but then after the doctor realizes he was duped by the Rani, they spend a little bit of time together, and then the doctor tells Mel to go back to the go back to Icona, and then they do reunite after Mel was captured by the Tetraps again. So yeah, but I think Mel was just not really written well in the story. There was a scene where she was actually confronted by a Tetrap and decides to start screaming before Icona actually shoots at it. And unfortunately, this is how Mel was written in this season, and it's a shame then because this is what ruins her. Like as Andrew Cartmel said, like even though this was not the cat, this is not the actress's fault. It's just the way she was written, and especially in Trial of a Time Lord and other stories as well. She was made to be like a screaming damsel in distress sort of character with little to no development. And I think this is probably one of the reasons why she's not really liked by many Whovians, and it's a shame because I do think Mel had potential to be a great companion. I like Mel, but then she could have been a great companion, but then they just didn't use her potential. Because in Trial of a Time Lord, she was very ballsy at times because she literally like went to the Matrix to try and save the Doctor, even though it was the Doctor's plan to try and meet the Valiant, but to actually go and do that was quite brave. However, and this story is the only time that is mentioned that she is a computer programmer, and she actually does something by disabling the ankle tags that Durrani had put in the Lacurtians and that was a very good scene. I think that was a scene that pretty much proves that Mel does have potential, but it's just the writers didn't really tap into that. But I do think we could have more good moments for Mel, even though there were some moments where she does stand out in like other stories, like Delta and the Bannerman, for example. But it could have been more, to be honest. So on to the sidecast, and I thought they were all very boring. So first off, we had Beas. He was an elder Lacurtian working for the Rani. Even though he was under duress, and if he went out of line, the Rani would kill the Lacurtians with the killer insects. He is also Faroon's husband, and he obviously stays with the Rani, even though he actually opposes her very much after seeing what happened to his daughter's son. But at the end, he aids the Doctor in stopping the Rani and her big brain, but it comes at his life when he sacrifices himself to destroy it. Then we have San. She was another Lacurtian working for the Rani, and she was the daughter of Beas and Faroon. She was able to escape from the lab, but then she ended up getting caught in the booby trap and got killed. Then we have Urak, a tetrap that was loyal to the Rani, and when he discovered the Rani's plan was actually kill all tetraps, he wasn't at all pleased, and when her plan failed, he and the other tetraps hijacked her TARDIS and they all decided to take her back to their home planet so she can and they pretty much forced her to help them and their development. Then we have Icona. He was pretty much one of the main side characters. He was another Lacurtian. He sees Sun getting killed by the Rani's booby trap and finds Mel shortly after in the TARDIS, captures her and assumes she's evil because she looks like the Rani, and aids her and the Doctor in stopping the Rani. So after the Rani was defeated, he pretty much he was offered the anecdote to try and solve the Rani's to deal with the Rani's killer insect, but he decides to dispose of it, saying that in order to solve their own in order to survive, they need to solve their own problems without any help at all. Which is, I don't know why. Like, at least take it. I don't know why. I just don't know why. He's a very pig-headed character, and I can tell that the actor was not very impressed with the story. And then we have Faroon, Beas' wife, and she agreed for her husband to cooperate with Rani, but after seeing the dead body the skeleton of San, she wanted to rebel. She understood the sacrifice her husband made at the end, and honestly, I don't think this character did really much of anything. Even though she was heavily featured in the plot in some way, but she was just there. She's played by Wanda Ventham, who's, I said before, she's Benedict Cumberbatch's mother, and she has actually appeared in the Faceless Ones, the Patrick Charlton story, and Image of the Fendon, which was in the Tom Baker era. So she is a veteran act. She is a veteran actress and has appeared on Doctor Who before. So it's definitely nice seeing her again, even though she's under heavy makeup. But yeah. Then we also have Lanisha. She or he was Icona's brother who was killed by the Rani's insects when she refused to rebel against the Rani. And of course, the Rani is the big bad of the story. And the Rani has decided to adopt all the geniuses all over space and time, including Albert Einstein, so she can use their brain power to power up a bigger brain to think of some calculations to fly a rocket into the Lacurshian sun or something. Well, it was a bit confusing. I did lose focus on like what was going on there, so I think that's what I kind of understood from it. I think the rocket was used to fight the Lacurshian sun to try and so that the asteroid will be able to that was full of dark matter will be able to arrive at Lacurtia and that will probably kill all of the Lacurtians, so to speak. So she decides to hold the Lacurtians elsewhere so she can actually get on with her without any interruptions. And it's implied that she had attacked the Doctor's TARDIS so she can capture him as well, because for her plan to work, she needed the Doctor's brain because of his knowledge in time travel and so to speak. So as soon as the TARDIS arrived in Lacurtia, she decided to dress up as Mel to try and confuse the Doctor, even though the regenerated Doctor had recognized Rani instantly, but then he was like knocked out. But then as soon as he recovered, she entered dressed up as Mel to try and confuse the Doctor, even though the Doctor at times was starting to catch on to the fact that this does not look like Mel, and then she pretty much had to slap him to try and get him back in line. And it does actually work until Mel actually until the real Mel meets the Doctor, and then the Doctor realizes that he's been duped by the Rani. And then after the facade goes away, she pretty much gets on with her plan. She is able to get the Doctor into that big brain machine of hers, and then it malfunctions because the brain itself started becoming dysfunctional, and it ultimately failed. And then the Rani was captured by the Tetramps in her TARDIS so they can take her back to her own planet. I like Kate O'Mara and her take on the Rani, but honestly, the Rani was just as bad as she wasn't bad in the Mark of the Rani. I disliked how much of a panto villain that she became, and it made the story so fucking farcical. And I understand that O'Mara was known for very camp performances. She actually did willingly leave Hollywood because she's a British actress, but then she was working in Hollywood. I think she was working on the original Dynasty, the American soap opera, back in 1780s soap opera that was very infamous for its cat fights. Right, but then she decided to come back to the UK to film Doctor Who, so to speak. But I understand she was known for her camp performances, but this just really took the cake in a very bad way. And on to the many faults the story has. Bad performances, bad plot, bad writing, weird scenes you expect from a local panto, and I think the story was doomed from the start by having the Sixth Doctor regenerate into Seven in the cold opening, especially with the Sixth Doctor himself not actually showing up, but then he had to get McCoy in a blonde wig to do so. And the reason for the generation was bad. Aside from the bad writing, this plot was just moving very slow, and it was very clear that it was padded out, and it was very clear in the first two parts, but mainly in part one. And the filler obviously being Rani deciding to disguise herself as Mel to confuse the Doctor, which was just as weird. And then when the Doctor started noticing something was off, the Rani would just attack him. Mel was misused, and I think this story and Paradise Tower has actually ruined her character to the point where there was no way it could be redeemed. Even though she does have some stuff to do in Delta and the Band, remember, it was just not enough. I can honestly think that Sylvester McCoy didn't really deserve this as his first story, especially with his performances in his final two seasons, and I honestly think that were some of the very best of the 60 years of Doctor Who. But with that being said, he does have a very shaky intro because of the writing and all the nonsense that was going on. And thankfully, this is the last story that Pip and Jane Baker actually write for Doctor Who, even though their script writing was just not the very best, because they were trying to overcomplicate things by adding like all this fancy posh grammar to try and replace just normal sayings, like just say the normal sayings instead of all the damn theatrics. But This is their last story that they write for Doctor Who, thankfully, so we do get better writers in this season, but yeah. In addition, I do think there was a missed opportunity on having the geniuses actually wake up and actually helping the Doctor stop the Rani, and I would have honestly liked to see a scene with Albert Einstein like interacting with the Doctor and bantering with one another, even sneaking in some genius dialogue that that would have pretty much flown over our heads. But in the revival, the Doctor does mention being mates with Einstein, and I like to think that they bonded after the events of the story. So, to conclude this review, the time in Rani kicks the Sylvester McCoy era off in the very rare misfire. The plot did not work, and it was clear as did that John Nathan Turner and new script editor Andrew Cutmer really have a lot to do to try and prevent what happened in the Colin Baker era from happening again. So I gave the story a 3 out of 10, making it a bad egg. My next review is Paradise Towers, a story that's not much better than Time and Rani, to be honest. But thanks for watching. Please let me know what you thought of Time and Rani, and let me know what you think of this review as well. If you haven't subscribed to this channel, please do so and spread the word. It will help me it will help me out a lot. Like the video if you can, and I'll see you later.